ironic, but this is the only amazing Despicable Me movie. Because yes, the original Despicable Me is not terrible, particularly on what was an incredibly limited budget, which is actually sometimes pretty apparent in the animation, and not a perfect movie by any stretch. It is pretty amazing what they achieved and went on to do from here. This may very well come as a surprise for a lot of my subscribers who know full well I'm not exactly Illumination's biggest fan. Not only do I not like a lot of their movies, but also how commercially contrived a lot of them are. Every movie is made for profit, don't get me wrong, but I often feel like Illumination are wearing that badge on their sleeve to a ridiculous degree. If anything, I should resent this original movie as it spawned the corporate monster we know today. The Minions are the mascot of this company's commercial invasion of our lives. Their presence in pop culture today is the closest comparison we have to that of Mickey Mouse almost 100 years ago. For all of us schmucks who weren't alive back then, a more recent example is probably the first 5 years of SpongeBob. You know, that's the level we're talking about here. Everyone knows what a Minion is. It doesn't matter what used to be associated with that word. Rest in peace, Megamind. The fourth Despicable Me movie was absolutely terrible, yet by most estimations, no one really seems to mind. In fact, it's quietly crept up to crossing $1 billion. Whether it actually crosses that mark doesn't even really matter. I think they're more than happy to take the $970 million it's currently sitting at. And yet, I can't resent it. I think it's pretty solid. I'd put a lot of the Pixar and DreamWorks catalog over it, but do note I consider some of these movies to be among the best ever made. This franchise became a monster for a reason, and it's because this very first one here was such a knockout. Before the Minions were printing money for Universal, they were just some funny ensemble characters that let them throw loads of side gags and slapstick set pieces in the movie. A lot like Scrat in the Ice Age movies, really. Kinda makes more sense when you realize that producer Chris Meledandri was behind both of these franchises. Man, when you look at all those Ice Age sequels, Despicable Me suddenly makes a lot more sense. But anyway, what I'm trying to say here is I actually do kinda like this first movie. The franchise that followed happened for a reason, on the foundations of a solid concept and world. However, it's also no coincidence that most of the Despicable memes we see today are completely coded around this original movie.
We steal the moon!
But nonetheless, let's go through again the movie that sparked off all of these memes. Let's get into the only not terrible Despicable Me movie. I always forget about this cold open in Egypt the movie begins with, partly because this is about as weak as the animation gets. I know these characters are never really seen again, but these guys are barely a rung above Jimmy Neutron levels of animation. Mad that this is the visual quality that kicked off Illumination. So not a great start where that's concerned. It's so weird because the animation in the rest of this movie is pretty solid. But hey, we all have to start from somewhere. Animation aside, in story and humor, it's still a really solid way to introduce us to the Despicable Me universe. As soon as you see the pyramid deflate, you know exactly what kind of movie you're watching. It immediately sets up this world where villains steal significant landmarks, because apparently killing people's too strong a topic for something primarily targeting kids, in an entertaining way. This is then followed by the obligatory news validation of the event, featuring the first of a few off-putting NBC name drops. Very subtle, Universal. Thanks for that. I guess the signs were always there. On to the initial mislead, that cuts the groove from this event.
Which of the world's villains is responsible?
I like that. When we meet the character for the first time, the implication is that he stole it. Already, the script is playing with our expectations in an inventive way. Before becoming a meme, Gru was a completely new take on the villain-turned-good character arc. It may be weird that Despicable Me and Megamind came out the same year with a similar premise, and unfortunate for Megamind as that ended up losing out financially, but they are otherwise completely unique from each other. Megamind is the story of a comic book supervillain, whilst Gru is very much the James Bond gadget-loaded villain. Also, for all their faults, the entire Despicable Me franchise is a whole universe better than what they've done since with Megamind. God, don't even get me started on that again.
And that was how I got an A in Mr. Doodle's political clowning class.
The first thing Gru actually does to establish he's a bad person is so petty. I love it. So unnecessary. As is freezing a whole queue of people. I'm a bit older, but I do know that the freeze ray sequence for a lot of Gen Z is basically a core memory from their childhood. To be fair to Gru, as far as this first movie is concerned, there is absolutely no police presence in his area, so fair enough. We don't see them at all in this movie. Maybe they just know it's not worth bothering him. There doesn't seem to be any spies or superheroes to go up against them either, so what the hell. Also, I found out his full name's Felonious Gru, and we know full well now that convicted felons can still absolutely excel in society, so what do you know, Illumination truly were clairvoyant.
Despicable Me.
Wow, that's one way to get the title in early doors. Ironically, the beginning of Pharrell Williams' world domination arc, and also Illumination leaning on pop culture music. Ironically, I think one of the better examples, at least it, translates in. And Despicable Me always does have original music from Pharrell, so that's not, the worst thing in the world. Funnily enough, the movie was actually originally titled Evil Me, and was the brainchild of Spanish animator Sergio Pablos, who then pitched it to our boy Chris Meledandri. This was in the very early days for Illumination, with Meledandri having also recently founded it after departing the Ice Age franchise. So actually, those later Ice Age sequels are not necessarily his fault, but this was their first gig, and so production was very heavily scrutinized. Interestingly, like the issues Pixar had with early versions of Woody in the beginning, Gru was also massively reworked, as initial versions were so bad guy that he was kind of unlikable. The core of this movie would be his upcoming relationship with the girls, so go too mean on the character and the audience wouldn't have bought into it. Either way, eventually the name changed away from Evil Me to Despicable Me, and honestly it was the right choice. And with the character, it's always a fine line trying to set up an evil character to believe in, so ice cream and freeze rays, that's fine. Don't need to push too much further out the boat there. On to the protagonist's status quo sequence. They use this Ned Flanders coded character to hilariously establish that this neighbor just treats this dark looking house like it's nothing unusual at all. Going into the house, I like how the design as well reflects the stretched gothic look that matches the exterior. Its archaic look with medieval weapons on display in a domesticated setting is both great for the subsequent reveal of the cannon being a high-tech elevator in disguise, whilst also setting up later the idea that Gru is an old hat villain behind the times. Honestly, there's a lot of breakdown you could say about the decoration and architecture of the Illumination world. Genuinely, actually, there's a lot of architecture we could talk about with this franchise. Maybe I'll get onto that one day. Anyway, Gru's unable to enjoy his freshly stolen muffin, as at the door we get our first introduction to the girls!
Cookies for sale!
And this here is a great way to introduce them early on, familiarizing us with them in Gru's story before we cut back to them separately later on. On a rewatch of any decent movie, it's always kind of satisfying to see all the players placed on the board before the story's revealed about how they ultimately all fit together.
You will always be one of the greats.
I recognize that voice behind Dr. Nefario. It sounds kind of familiar. Oh. Yeah, obviously not much can be done about this creep in the voice cast. They did replace him later with Ramesh Ranganathan in the fourth movie, so I guess at least it's not as bad as the movies that we can also visually see him. Here, he's just putting on an unconvincing, gruffly voice that doesn't necessarily match the character design. Anyway, Dr. Nefario, voiced by the cancelled Lothario, gives us the first reveal that it was in fact a rival villain that stole the pyramid.
They're saying he makes all other villains look lame.
Like a lot of the tech in this movie, I like how unnecessarily complicated the secret lair transportation sequence is. There's not just a secret door, the entire room moves around to form a secret door. Also, the fact that they've gone to these lengths to hide the evil base as if the house and rocket car aren't already giving the game away. There's a lot of, I don't know if I call it subtle, but like ironic humor in this movie that's just so stellar to actually see.
Minions assemble!
And then this is where we are first introduced to the iconic Minions. The origins of the Minions makes a lot more sense when you see them on screen. Behind the scenes, they were initially envisioned as an amalgamation of the Oompa Loompas and Jawas from Star Wars. Suddenly it all makes sense. Interestingly, they weren't actually part of the original draft of the script and were added in later. Man, that's like 80% of the franchise's revenue that almost just wasn't a thing. Kinda like how Aardman kept fumbling the bag with near misses. Even here, I don't think they fully realized what they had with the Minions yet. Being a later addition to the story stage, they never outstay their welcome in this movie, and perhaps that sometimes can't be said for later installments. Here, as Gru goes down the vast base on his lift, we get the initial world building of seeing all the different Minions working on whatnot. We also get little touches such as the Minions exercise class going on. Kinda depressing Gru has better welfare facilities than most employers out there. And as we learn in Gru's big speech, they are absolutely employees. Mainly through them being told they're not getting a Christmas bonus, but hey, at least they're not slaves or ambiguously incorporated servants like a certain chocolate making entrepreneur out there. We also find out as early as here that Gru seems to know a lot of the Minions' names.
Looking good, Kevin! How's the family? Dave, listen up, please!
Again, doing one better than a lot of actual companies with villains as employers.
That's how I roll!
Oh look, another NBC moment. We've of course seen the protagonist in leadership position does a speech a few times. I still think the original Toy Story is the best example of this.
Andy's birthday party has been moved to today.
As well as the depressing callback at the start of Toy Story 3.
Gather everyone up.
We are gathered, Woody.
However, it's with good reason. It helps tie together the world building we've seen throughout the opening, and in no uncertain terms where the character stands within it. In a movie that's young leading by design, you do need moments like this that clearly sets up the characters and the story. However, that doesn't mean you can't make it entertaining and interesting, which this movie also does. I mean, this scene became the thing people recreate on TikTok for a reason. It's an iconic moment in a scene that could have just been basic setup and also makes sense in the context of a villain. The villain laying out their evil scheme is a known trope, so of course you've got to have Gru doing it. Although, is it technically stealing? I don't know if anyone actually owns the moon. I mean, I guess they've got a flag, but yeah. It's white now. Wow, it's almost like I spend my days overthinking animated movies. Anyway, it certainly one-ups stealing a pyramid. Meanwhile, we joined the girls.
You're never gonna get adopted, you know that, don't you?
My word, some serious Professor Umbridge vibes here. By the way, voiced by Kristen Wiig. Wonder if she'll pop up in this franchise again. There is absolutely no safeguarding or law enforcement in this universe, I swear. I mean, the box of shame is clearly emotional abuse. And I guess there's something to be said about a more villainous villain in the personal sense rather than the big theatrical sense that we can genuinely be against, you know? Gru is a bad guy.
This does not mean you're a bad guy.
You know? Nonetheless, in between the initial Gru shenanigans, it's good that we get this scene setting up this three, so we're invested in them later on. Lesser movies would have cut this scene and just had them turn up when Gru sees them. The larger-than-life cruelty of the orphanage also has that exaggerated Roald Dahl vibe to it, which I also quite like. Very fitting for a kid's movie, you know, a kid's book adaptation in a sense. It very much sits in line with the humor throughout this movie as well. The next day, before Gru can proceed with his plan, Gru must first get a loan from the bank to build the rocket, which by design initially sounds odd, as obviously a standard thing a villain would do is rob said bank. However, once again playing with our expectations, after initially walking into the bank, Gru goes through a secret passageway to the Bank of Evil. I'm guessing it kind of works like the John Wick universe, just without all the assassins. Although, it does leave me confused how this bank gets revenue from this stuff being stolen, as far as I can see, the villains just keep what they steal, so how does that work? Anyway, we get another brilliantly convoluted villain secret passageway, this time being the urinals within the normal bank. Though it does beg the question if there's an alternative entrance in the ladies' toilets. There's more gloriously silly details such as the increasingly crushed statue between the pillars, and then we get our first introduction to Vector, misleadingly set up as an absolute goof of a character.
Go by the name of Vector.
The sort you'd expect would only pop up in this scene as a quick bit. But of course, that's not the case. When Gru goes in to get his funding approved, he discovers that the guy with the piranha gun was actually the one behind the pyramid.
He just stole a pyramid!
I know it's done through conversation rather than a visual cue, but I really like this different take on the antagonist reveal. It's certainly not a generic movie. As I've highlighted a couple times already, you've got to appreciate how well they use misdirects in the story beats here. This scene also reveals to us that despite how his gadgets and legions of minions may have made him look in the prior scene, the Bank of Evil look on Gru as a has-been who hasn't been delivering the goods. Of course, we saw that his main bounties were just smaller versions of historical landmarks from Las Vegas, but here we see that those weren't just meant to be a gag, and there are consequences for that. Demanding Gru steals the shrink ray he needs before they get any funding, Gru goes off and does exactly that. Maybe he should have done that before approaching the bank. Anyway, before all that happens, there's one key thing to note. Gru freeze rays Vector. Not a great idea, my guy. Of course, once he steals the shrink ray from what is simply described as a laboratory in Southeast Asia, minion squish gag and everything, it's not long until Vector shows up again. And it's a nice touch how Vector steals it in exactly the same way as they steal it from the lab. No honor among thieves, I guess. And as if the designs and clothes weren't enough of a giveaway, Vector's modern, sleek-looking vehicle cements this guy as a more modern Bill Gates, Musk, Zuckerberg kind of guy. The complete opposite of Gru with his more industrial-looking tin can. Notice how I'm just calling them vehicles, as I have no idea what else to really call them, I'll be honest. Are they planes? Spaceships that go into space? Flying car? No, that's not right either. Whatever they are, it's great creative design work from the animators and production team, and we get a neat chase sequence establishing the rivalry and contrast of the two. Gru going absolutely all in on every weapon they've got, whilst Vector just dodges them with ease. Again, they even interact with the world differently. Plus, one of my favorite Minions moments of one just going absolutely nuts on the artillery.
Fire now!
Of course, it all ends with true insult to injury, Vector using the shrink ray against Gru and co. They actually lose the race. The results of which gifts us with this shot.
I hate that guy.
But you can't hold a Gru down long, as he's quick to make a counterattack on Vector's lair, dressed as Oh dear. Yeah, dressing him like that was certainly a choice. I do quite like the dog binoculars gag though. In fact, generally, this whole sequence of Gru's attempt just being shut down by Vector via a remote with minimal effort is a lot of fun. You gotta love some Looney Tunes style humor, which oddly enough was very much getting less and less present, I feel like, in cartoons and animation, both at the time and kinda nowadays. Failing to infiltrate Steve Jobs' super building, Gru watches on as the same girls who tried to sell him cookies successfully get a customer out of Vector. See, I'm not gonna smash cut the clip every His plan's immediately obvious, and sure enough, he turns up to the orphanage the next day, dressed as a dentist for some reason.
And he's a dentist.
Could have just gone with a normal guy, my guy, but sure. And then we have another great comedy bit in a bubble, revealing the minions improvising his background info on the spot with predictably silly details.
And knighthood.
I have no idea what database she is using or why this couldn't have just been a pre-written document listing everything out, but hey, we get some great comedy out of it. Hey there, thank you for making it to the halfway mark of this video. Do subscribe if you're interested in more not terrible movies. I'll be bringing out one of these every 1 to 2 weeks. Let me know your thoughts on the movie, and I'll let you get back to the second half of the amazing Despicable Me. Genuinely, every scene is really well done in its own little bubble. It stands on its own 2 feet without the Minions iconage having to hold up the entire franchise, because the Minions had no iconage yet. If you wanted to be that pedantic, I'm sure you could make an argument for Gru just sneaking the cookie robots into their basket rather than, you know, adopting them. But adopt them he does, to mixed responses. Whilst the other two are horrified, Agnes launches in with blind optimism. Cue funny line.
You moved him, crowbar.
Once Gru brings them home, they inevitably work out he's the guy who turned down the cookies,
You're the guy who pretended he was a recorded message.
bringing things back round. He says it was someone else, but I don't think they all bought that. As the girls explore their sinister new home, we get perhaps the darkest joke in the whole movie.
Stay away from.
I know they quickly reveal what happened, but I wonder what the younger kids made of that one at first. As for me, this is exactly on line with my kind of humor. 10 out of 10 from me. As is his low-effort attempts at parenting with pet food bowls. Love it. Honestly, it's setting up some admittedly kind of simplistic boomer humor, but pandering to parenting-based jokes is something that's a wide appeal for both the kids and the parents to enjoy, you know? There's something both simplistic and openly potential to play with on that concept. We also get Gru laying out the rules, giving us the clip that Vine ate up back in the day.
Does this count as annoying?
Yeah, I'm that old. I remember it. I'm gonna be 30 in a couple of years. Thinking that'll do the job anyway. Gru heads on down to see how his cookie bots are getting along. Admittedly, I think this bit isn't quite as funny. The whole I said cookie bots, not boogie bots, just seems like a very overdone concept. Character mishears something, so they do another thing that rhymes. And when this extends the fart gun, I'm not a fart joke guy. Look, I did a whole video about it once. It's not the worst example in the world, and I'm sure kids liked it, so fair enough. Anyway, following the tradition of secret bases with entrances that are way too easy to stumble upon, Agnes accidentally summons the cannon elevator thing, and what do you know? They go down to the base. To be fair, a version of this story where they only discover the base later does sound tedious and waste time. I like that this story just cracks on and doesn't have the build-up and big reveal later, you know? It's not full-on, kids have no attention span, so we're gonna jump right to the retention part, but, you know, there's a nice balance of the two, because I mean, how many times have you seen that kind of story play out? Or they find out he's evil later. This doesn't stop Gru from trying though, as he claims that all of these minions are cousins, presumably part of the family tree that got busy with a box of Tic Tacs at some point. And then, with direct consequences and interactions, Agnes's unicorn gets completely disintegrated, so Gru sends 3 minions to retrieve a new one.
Tim, Mark, Phil.
In what I'd call the first side of what was to come. And it allows for a little bit more of a personal element of the general Minions ensemble, as we're now splitting up the groups into more intimate and individual pieces. This supermarket sequence, whilst fun, is also the first scene that you can tell was just there for the Minion shenanigans and doesn't really escalate the story. It's funny because what I like about Minions: The Rise of Gru is that they completely give up on prioritizing the story to favor these Minion sketches. By that point, that's essentially the whole movie, so it's an interesting story of how that evolved, or perhaps devolved is the word, from the original movie. Here, however, I actually quite like the story, so I could probably do without it, but still, you can see how it all comes together. It's all the elements of the foundation, highs and lows. Back to the house, I do like this bit where it's revealed the beds are bombs.
And highly unlikely to blow up.
I like that the evolution of their relationship is sort of bookended by the 3 bedtimes. bedtime sequences in this movie. To illustrate Gru's character growth, you need this first initial one where he puts them in hollowed out bombs to set up those latter scenes that we'll see. But we'll get there when we get there, as we go now into the cookie heist scene, where we begin to see the cracks of compromise between Gru and the girls. The fact that the superhero, in order to see through his evil plan, is made to negotiate with these children over a dance class is of course funny, but also gives the three girls a sense of agency in the story. They're not there to just be narrative pawns pushed around by Gru, and it is the first step building towards that central relationship. Relationship's all about compromise, after all.
3, 4.
The dance mum sequence is also another great touch, and also weirdly relatable considering a lot of us haven't been parents watching a child's dance class. As for the cookie bot sequence itself, once we actually get there, great callback as well, having the disguised pyramid behind the base. But anyway, it's a great sequence of animation, and eventually they get the shrink ray and get out of there. However, brushing off the fact that they're ending the cookie sales there, Gru comes into contact with his next compromise. It's time for the fun fair scene.
Here we go.
No.
And although it starts with Gru planning to abandon the kids there, what unfolds is the scene that takes him from his selfish, villainous motives to some investment in these people. You know, he's adopted. Sure, part of what demonstrates this is him shooting an overpowered fireball gun to win Agnes the Unicorn. But hey, he's not going to change overnight. Plus though, it's the kind of elevation that is fun to see and also is still kind of cool to kids. Kids have a strange amount of psychopathic enjoyment of evil things, you know? The storytelling here does a solid job of having those established character traits organically lead him into a situation where he ultimately does something for them. And he genuinely enjoys it by the end. I mean, the guy comes home with face paint and cotton candy, for goodness sake.
Okay, girls, go play.
But what's especially best, it doesn't feel forced at all and is just generally a fun sequence for the family audience it's made for. Also means
You don't love me!
when they get home, we see the beginning of Nefario's frustrations of Gru potentially getting distracted. It's great that Gru is this villainous character that goes into a change, but it's also great to have that sidekick character that doesn't change to allow us to see the contrast and growing conflict as Gru develops from one side of a character arc to another. However, Gru tries to calm him down and goes to call Mr. Perkins from the bank. After the initial praise of actually having the shrink ray, things go awry for Gru as the colliding world of parenthood mucks his evil presentation. And I gotta say, it's really funny as well.
I fly to the moon. I shrink the moon. I sit on the toilet. What?
This is one of the few toilet-adjacent gags I actually enjoy, and what do you know, it's another meme. But it is just great how, like, his brain initially just goes along with it for a time. This leads to Perkins revealing that, even with the ray, he wants Gru out of the picture of his own plan.
I love everything about your plan, except for you.
We then get a flashback to Gru's gallery of childhood trauma, which, even then, is still played for laughs. Which I'm kind of all for. It's almost refreshing when every other movie would be baiting for the real feels. We still feel sorry for him in this scene, but not every beat like this has to be the opening scene of Up, you know? It makes it a less dynamically emotive, incredible 100 out of 100 movie like Pixar does sometimes. But it's still a different form of entertainment, even if it's slightly diluted. And so Gru's funding is pulled. Initially, this just seems to be another Gru sucks beat following on from earlier, but then we get the reveal.
Your son is here.
Hey, Dad.
Oh yes, onto the nepotism storyline. Turns out he just wanted to steal Gru's plan for his kid. We're very much going for a Shrek 2 beeline with this one, and Vector's the incumbent Prince Charming, which makes Fiona... Anyway, this scene also rebalances the conflict as well, seeing the villains also having a dilemma. After all, Gru still has the shrink ray, and Vector gets shown up when Perkins shows that the girls were part of what tricked him. Nonetheless, he now of course has no funding and breaks the news to the minions. Cue obligatory doom and gloom story beat. We're in the end of Act 2, I think.
Good time to look for other employment options.
Frank and honest communication. Yet more evidence Gru is a better management than most of what's out there. Kinda makes you wonder where would the minions go next for employment options. Actually, maybe I don't want to think about that. You ever notice how in the Minions movie, they got stuck inside of an ice cave during the 1940s? I wonder why that was. When you think about it, really think about it, why did they go there? In fact, he's such a trusted employer that when the girls offer up their piggy bank to help, all the minions start chipping in as well. Don't know where they got that money from, and as a disclaimer, if you're working for a struggling business, do not give them your own money. You owe them nothing. Watch them burn. Anyway, that wholesome scene takes place, and they opt to build the rocket out of bits of the house. Jeff Bezos, take note. I mean, all we actually see them use from the house is one chair, but we'll presume all that rocket-shaped metal was lying around too. From here, we get a montage cutting between the building of the rocket and Gru's relationship with his newfound daughters growing. It's in the tougher times that they really come together. Marshmallows, pancakes, the full works. The dad energy has truly arrived.
Mine's shaped like a dead gone.
Best exemplified by the next bedtime sequence. Even just the small changes, such as the bed bombs being displayed much more cozily and Gru checking if they've brushed their teeth, though he's still stern, you can see those minor brushes of care starting to show through the cracks. Sure, he begrudgingly agrees to read the storybook that he proceeds to hilariously berate.
Wow, this is garbage.
Something I'm sure many a parent can relate to. However, it's also those smaller details in the scene that really sells his affection here. Meanwhile, Dr. Nefario grows frustrated by Gru's new direction, because apparently he's not allowed to have a healthy work-life balance. They are evil. Which all comes to a head when Gru notices that the launch date is on the same day as the girls' show. And to be fair to him, there's never really a good reason given why it has to be that date. Like, in my headcanon, Nefario was the one to put it on that day, especially considering what he ends up doing. Nefario, of course, pushes back about the girls being a distraction. In this capacity, I like that they use the Nefario character in there as kind of like a reverse Jiminy Cricket. He physically represents Gru's internal conflict in a way that's clearer for a young audience, as well as just an active challenger to Gru's parenthood rather than having it all happen in his head. We also get another key bit of setup, granted whilst the minions are photocopying their where the previously shrunk Grumobile, that's what I'm calling it now, regains its former size. Not good for our budding moon shrinkers. Back to wholesome Daddy Gru, our harmless tea party game gets gate-crashed when
I received a call that you wanted to return them.
this is our impossible choice beat for our protagonist. He doesn't want to part with the girls, but he's not far along enough in his growth to be able to let go of who he's supposed to be. It's an all too relatable problem when you've gone for a career that ultimately pulls you away from a relationship or something along those lines. Or even if you haven't directly experienced it, you can understand where the conflict comes from.
I did it for your own good.
Overruled by thinking this is what he needs to do, Gru lets her take the girls away back to the orphanage. I can't say that this movie hits me in the feels exactly, but it still works as a solid emotional beat in the movie. I wouldn't be surprised though if this does resonate more with adopted and orphaned kids. And of course, as a treat for being cut off from their pseudo father figure, all three of them get to have a box of shame each. Godfather reference, fair play. Every movie's gotta have one, I guess. To the rocket, we see a couple of the minions still know what needs to go down here, and sneak the dance show tickets into Gru's pocket. Meanwhile, after being out of the picture for a hot minute, inevitably, this is the moment that Vector returns. Whilst Walmart Ned Flanders looks on, we get the one moment where Vector's use of marine projectiles actually becomes useful. It's fine though, Gru immediately kills him. Rest in peace, buddy. The shrinking of the moon itself is just a cool action moment. There's not much more to say on that. I do really enjoy the subsequent cutbacks to Earth showing surfers falling over as the waves disappear. Also, never forget that werewolves are apparently canon in the Despicable Me universe. And as ridiculous as it sounds, the movie totally gets you to emotionally invest in a scene where a guy holds the moon in his hand only to be distracted by some dance show tickets. With just a couple looks, you get the most important part of Gru's character arc. We see that his goals since he first set out to steal have shifted now that he's actually got it. His priorities have changed. Something a lot of us experience as people enter our lives that we grow to care for. It's a moment that really makes the movie and a great message for younger audiences that isn't totally spelled out. Gru speeds off to see the show, meanwhile Nefario realizes the shrinking is temporary. As the show begins, you can see the girls are looking out for Gru. At first, it looks like we're in for just a back and forth between here and Gru, but then considering we've seen this kind of scene where the neglectful parent rushes to watch the kid in the show, this is just a great twist on that setup. It adds stakes to the scene and incorporates it directly into the movie's climax. Gru lands the rocket in the street to not much bother somehow. No police in sight still. Why would they be here? There's no police in this whole universe. I love this gag with the playground. And did he just step on the brakes of a crashing rocket? Is that how it works? And then once again, the storytelling misdirects us, with Gru showing up to the dance, and it has long since finished. Playing around with that old cross-cutting feature. You think it's happening at the same time, but it turns out it's desynchronized. And of course, with what we know, that is extra bad news. Yet another clever way of keeping the momentum going. I'd forgotten how good some of the storytelling choices are in this. No wonder it is the only not terrible Despicable Me movie. As Gru soon discovers, Vector has kidnapped the kids and taken them back to his mansion. We get a somewhat predictable give me the moon first beat, where of course he doesn't return the kids. Clearly, Gru's not seen Aladdin.
First give me the love!
And then, Gru appears to display godlike powers. Jumping on missiles in slow motion? Not a problem. Also, even if they had hit him, aiming missiles at your own house doesn't seem like the best idea.
You punched my shirt!
Love it. Of course, it can't be that simple, and Vector takes off with And the
Girls!
Nefario and the minions aren't far behind. It is finale time after all. Into the final chase we go, where of course the moon's temporarily shrunken qualities quickly factor into the picture. And then Vector's crushed to death. Oh, never mind. This guy has plot armor for days, apparently. Even at that size, the literal moon should have killed him. It's a great little sequence of things getting worse and worse as well as the moon has been getting bigger this whole time. Explained because the bigger the mass, the faster it wears off, which I'll allow. They managed to make it work. It's some nice physics-based drama, I guess. On to the classic leap of faith moment. Like a few moments in the movie, they do tend to go for the safer beats. I guess in many ways, this first movie was kind of a proof of concept that Illumination can put together a competent and successful animated movie. So I guess that makes sense. There are some places you want to be safe, you know? And considering this is meant to be a first run, it does a pretty immaculate job and isn't that crazy safe. Of course, this was very much Illumination's first trip out, and they did pretty good. They had to gamble with this new animation studio, which had all of its animation produced in France. At the time of this movie coming out as well, Meledandri's former studio Blue Sky was also at a peak of their success with their first Ice Age movie without him being the highest grossing entry yet, just the previous year from this. So I imagine there was a lot of questioning of whether there was even any room for yet another animation studio to succeed. Animating this movie would be French studio MacGuff, which have gone on to basically be behind every Illumination movie. I mean, they're now literally called Illumination Paris. And so alas, Illumination's successful business model, outsourcing to them, is a lot cheaper than establishing an in-house animation studio. Wow, I wonder if Universal will ever do this with another major studio that they own. Nonetheless, getting back to this, Gru confessing how much he cares to the girls is a sweet moment, so you can't fault it all too much. After this sequence of events eventually finds a way of making the minions relevant to the climax, the day is saved. And then Vector gets fired into space and killed. Oh no, he has an emergency space hoodie. That guy's not going to be coming down for another, what, 15 years? Yeah, sounds about right. Of course, we've then got to get into the fact that the world now thinks Gru's a mysterious hero for unwittingly reversing something he caused. Once again, courtesy of NBC. And finally, he gives his girls a goodnight kiss. And all the minions. It's one of the few moments I can consider the minions genuinely cute, and I feel like it's a more rarer case of Gru showing genuine familial affection to his massive ensemble. You know, who doesn't love that bit? And we finish off with the silly dance sequence every animated movie has to end off on. We can thank Shrek for starting it and Hotel Transylvania for killing it. Maybe, we'll see. For Despicable Me, it's a pretty safe ending that's not that funny, but it rounds the movie off nice enough. Followed by a post-credit reminder of how overboard Hollywood went on the 3D gimmick. Remember that? And yeah, at the end of the day, that was the only not terrible Despicable Me movie. It's actually pretty good despite the corporate monster it spawned. And though the series would go into all sorts of weird, wacky, and very shallow directions, at the end of the day, you just can't beat the original. The one where we saw Gru go from bad guy to dad guy. I can see why this movie remained cherished by people till this day, memes and college campuses amok with Minion Nights and whatnot. And you could certainly do a lot worse for a nostalgic childhood movie. I may have had my criticisms of the studio that grew out of it, but it's a thumbs up from me for Illumination's amazing Despicable Me. For now though, I shall finally end it off there. My name's been Daz, thank you very much for reaching the end of this video. Do tell me your thoughts on the original Despicable Me, and I shall see you in a little bit.